The gunshot echoed through the marble corridors of the Waldorf Astoria like a thunderclap, and Lee Hyun-jin didn't flinch. Blood pooled beneath Dmitry Volkov's $1,000 shoes, spreading across the white Italian tile like spilled wine. His eyes, wide with betrayal, locked onto Hyun-jin's as he clutched his chest. You promised," he gasped. Hyun-jin leaned down, his voice cold as Chicago winter. "Promise nothing. You mistook civility for weakness, Dmitry. Fatal error." As his body went slack, Hyun-jin straightened his Tom Ford suit and checked his Patek Philippe. 7:45. The Metropolitan Museum Gala started in 15 minutes, and he had a date to collect. A date that would change everything. A date with his maid. His name was Lee Hyun-jin, and in the underworld that stretched from the Magnificent Mile to the Brooklyn docks, they called him the Ghost of Seoul because he operated in shadows so deep, even the FBI's organized crime unit couldn't pin him down. At 34, he controlled 60% of the illegal arms trade on the East Coast, laundered money through 17 legitimate businesses, and commanded the loyalty of 300 soldiers who would die at his word. He was untouchable, unreachable, and utterly alone. Until Gene Yancey walked into his penthouse 6 months ago with a mop bucket and eyes that saw straight through every wall he'd ever built. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, because we love connecting with our global family from every corner of the world. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now because tomorrow we're dropping another story you absolutely cannot miss. Trust me, you'll want to be notified. Now, let's take you back to where this all began, to the moment everything Hyun-jin thought he knew about power and control shattered like glass under a hammer. 6 months earlier, Hyun-jin's consigliere Park Min-soo had insisted he needed legitimate domestic staff to maintain the appearance of normalcy. The FBI had been sniffing around his businesses, and having a regular cleaning service access his penthouse in Trump Tower was a liability. "Get someone discreet," Hyun-jin had told him. "Someone who knows how to keep their mouth shut and their eyes down." Min-soo had sent Jean. She arrived on a Tuesday morning, 27 years old with skin like mahogany and natural hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore generic cleaning company scrubs and carried herself with a quiet dignity that immediately set her apart from every other person who'd ever served the Ghost of Seoul. Most people who entered his presence either trembled with fear or reeked of fake confidence, desperate to impress. Jean did neither. She simply nodded, said, "Mr. Lee, I'm here to clean your home. I'll stay out of your way," and got to work. Hyun-jin watched her from his office, pretending to review shipping manifests from their latest container shipment through the port of Newark. She moved through his space with an efficiency that bordered on artistry, never touching anything unnecessary, never lingering where she shouldn't. But it was the way she paused in front of his mother's photograph, the only personal item he displayed, that caught his attention. She didn't ask questions. She simply cleaned the frame with extra care, as if she understood that this single image mattered more than all the wealth surrounding it. "You're very thorough," he said, stepping out of his office. She didn't startle. "Attention to detail matters, Mr. Lee. In any profession. You're not afraid of me." She met his eyes directly, and he saw something there that unsettled him. Intelligence, awareness, and a complete lack of judgment. "Should I be? Most people are. Most people don't know you." She returned to polishing the granite countertop. "They know your reputation. That's different." He should have fired her right then. She was too observant, too comfortable, too dangerous. Instead, he said, "Same time next week," and walked away, disturbed by how much he wanted her to say yes. Over the following months, Jean became a fixture in Hyun-jin's life, the only predictable, peaceful element in a world of constant violence and calculation. She came every Tuesday and Friday 8 a.m. sharp. She never asked about the blood he occasionally tracked in. Never mentioned the hushed phone calls in Korean that detailed executions and territory disputes. Never commented on the nights she arrived to find him still in yesterday's clothes, whiskey glass in hand, staring out at the Manhattan skyline like it held answers he'd never find. But she noticed everything. He knew she did. "You should eat," she said one Friday, 4 months into her employment. Hyunjin had been up for 36 hours orchestrating a retaliatory strike against the Irish mob in Boston after they'd hit one of his gambling operations in Southie. 3 of his men were dead. 5 of theirs were worse than dead. "I'm not hungry." She disappeared into his kitchen and returned 20 minutes later with kimchi jjigae, somehow made from ingredients in his rarely used refrigerator. The smell alone transported him to his grandmother's kitchen in Busan, before his family emigrated to America, before his father was murdered by the Yakuza, before he became this. "How did you? Your ingredients tell stories, Mr. Lee. You keep gochugaru and doenjang in a penthouse where you never cook. That tells me you miss home, even if you won't admit it." She set the bowl in front of him. "Eat. Whatever war you're fighting will still be there in 20 minutes. It was perfect. And for those 20 minutes, he wasn't the ghost of soul. He was just a man eating soup, watched over by a woman who somehow made him feel human again. That's when he knew he was in trouble. The realization fully crystallized 3 weeks before the Met Gala, during what should have been a routine meeting with the Commission, the ruling body of New York's 5 major crime families, now expanded to include representatives from the Korean, Russian, and Chinese syndicates. They met in a private room at Keen's Steakhouse, where the walls were lined with churchwarden pipes from a more civilized era of organized crime. Anthony Little Tony Castellano, who ran the Gambino family operations, was pushing for a larger cut of their arms distribution network. "Your people are making too much money, Lee. It's unbalanced. Bad for business." "My people take more risk," Hyunjin replied calmly, cutting into his porterhouse. "We move product through 3 countries before it touches American soil. Your people just distribute locally. The profit split reflects the risk assessment." "Your people are fucking gooks who should remember their guests in our city," Castellano's nephew, Frankie, interjected. He was young, stupid, and high on cocaine-fueled bravado. The room went silent. Park Min-soo's hand moved toward his waistband. Hyunjin's lieutenant, Kim Jae-sung, stood from his chair. Even the Russians looked uncomfortable. Hyunjin took another bite of steak, chewed slowly, and swallowed before speaking. "Frankie, your uncle built an empire on respect and strategic thinking. You're pissing on his legacy with racial slurs that demonstrate neither." He set down his knife and fork, aligned them perfectly on his plate, and looked at little Tony. "Control your nephew or I will. Those are your only options." Castellano backhanded Frankie hard enough to split his lip. "Apologize." "I'm not. Apologize or I'll let Lee take you outside myself." Frankie muttered an apology through bloody teeth. The meeting continued. Business was discussed, territories were confirmed, and percentages remained unchanged. Hyunjin won as he always did, through superior preparation and the willingness to go further than anyone else. But driving home that night he felt nothing. No satisfaction. No triumph. Just the familiar emptiness that had haunted him since his father's murder when he was 16, since he'd taken his first life at 17, since he'd built an empire on bones and blood and discovered that power couldn't fill the void where his humanity used to live. He arrived home at 11 p.m. Jean's car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic that she kept running through sheer determination, was still in the parking garage. He found her in his kitchen, crying silently while scrubbing his oven. Her phone propped against the backsplash playing a voicemail on speaker. A man's voice, slurred with alcohol, vicious with intent. "You think you're too good for me now, bitch? Think you can just take my daughter and disappear? I'll find you, Jean. I'll make you remember who you belong to. I'll make sure." She saw him and jumped, quickly ending the voicemail and wiping her eyes. Mr. Lee, I'm so sorry. I thought you wouldn't be home until late. I'll just finish. Who was that? No one. It's nothing. I'll be out of your way in. Jean. He used the voice that made mob bosses negotiate. Who was that? She sagged against the counter, and he saw the weight she'd been carrying. My ex-husband, Marcus. We divorced 2 years ago after things got bad. I have full custody of our daughter, Nia. She's 5. He's not supposed to contact me, but he's been calling from different numbers, showing up places. He's getting bolder. Where is your daughter now? With my mother in Queens. I don't bring my problems to work, Mr. Lee. I'm professional. This won't. Has he threatened you before? It's just talk. He's angry about the divorce, about the restraining order, about. That wasn't just talk. He pulled out his phone. That was a credible threat from a man with escalating obsession. Give me his full name. Mr. Lee, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you. Full name. Last known address. Any associates he runs with. She stared at him, and he watched the internal debate play across her face. She was proud, independent, determined to handle her own problems. But she was also terrified, exhausted, and out of options. Marcus Devon Yancey. Last I knew, he was staying with his cousin in Brownsville. He runs with some gang members, low-level dealers. Mr. Lee, I don't want trouble. I just want him to leave me alone. Consider it done. What does that mean? He met her eyes directly. It means Marcus Devon Yancey will never threaten you again. It means you and your daughter are under my protection now. It means you're safe. I can't afford. You're not paying. This isn't business, Jean. This is. He paused, surprised by his own words. This is personal. She searched his face for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw. The monster. The man. Both. Why would you do this for me? Because you make kimchi jjigae without being asked. Because you clean my mother's photograph with reverence. Because you see me, the real me, and you don't flinch or worship or fear, you just accept. Because in 6 months, you've become the only genuine thing in my entire manufactured life. Because I can, he said instead. And because no one threatens what's mine. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication neither of them was ready to examine. Marcus Devon Yancey disappeared 3 days later. Not dead. Hyunjin wasn't a monster despite what the FBI files claimed, but relocated to a construction job in Alaska with a very clear understanding that returning to New York would be the last decision he ever made. His cousin and associates received similar encouragements to forget Jean existed. Hyunjin had his tech specialist delete every digital trace of her address and her mother's address from accessible databases. He stationed a rotating team of his most discreet soldiers to monitor her neighborhood and her daughter's school. Jean never asked him what he'd done. She was too intelligent not to know, too practical to demand details that would make her complicit. But the next time she came to clean, she brought homemade songpyeon, Korean rice cakes that required hours of labor to create. She said nothing as she left them on his kitchen counter. He said nothing as he ate them that night, each bite tasting like gratitude and something far more dangerous. The following Tuesday, Hyunjin did something he'd never done before. He stayed home during her cleaning hours, working from his home office with the door open, letting himself simply exist in her presence. She hummed while she worked, old gospel songs that spoke of redemption and grace, concepts foreign to his world. The sound filled his penthouse with a warmth he hadn't known he was missing. "You have a beautiful voice," he said during her water break. She smiled, genuinely pleased. "My grandmother sang in church. I grew up surrounded by music. Tell me about her." And she did. For the next hour, while she worked and he pretended to read reports, Jean told him about her grandmother who raised her in South Carolina, who taught her that dignity wasn't about what you owned but how you carried yourself, who showed her that service wasn't servitude when you chose it freely. She told him about moving to New York to escape Marcus, about working 3 jobs to support Nia while getting her associate's degree in business management at night. She told him about dreams deferred but not abandoned. He told her about his father, who'd been a simple restaurant owner until the Yakuza demanded protection money he couldn't pay. About watching him bleed out on the floor of his own establishment while Hyunjin hid in a supply closet, 7 years old and powerless. About his mother, who worked herself to death trying to keep the restaurant running, dying of a stroke when he was 15, leaving him alone. About his uncle, who introduced him to the Korean mob, who taught him that power was the only thing that mattered, who died in an FBI raid when he was 23, leaving him his territory and his soldiers. "That's when you became the ghost," Jean said softly. "It wasn't a question. That's when I became untouchable, unreachable. Nothing could hurt me if I didn't let anyone close enough to matter. That sounds lonely. Loneliness is safer than loss." She stopped dusting and looked at him with those eyes that saw everything. "That's not living, Mr. Lee. That's just surviving. There's a difference. In my world, surviving is winning. Maybe you're in the wrong world." No one had ever suggested that before. No one had ever implied that the empire he'd built, the power he'd accumulated, the fear he'd inspired, might be the wrong prize entirely. The thought was heretical, dangerous, intoxicating. What world should I be in, Jean? One where you're allowed to be human. One where you eat more than whiskey for dinner. One where someone cares if you come home. She returned to dusting, but her words lingered like smoke. That night, lying in his emperor-sized bed in his climate-controlled penthouse overlooking the city he controlled, Hyunjin made a decision that would change everything. He would take Jean to the Metropolitan Museum Gala. The Met Gala was the social event of the season, where New York's elite mingled under the guise of charity while really measuring their influence against each other. Every major crime family would have representation there, carefully masked as legitimate businessmen. The Castellanos, the Lucchese's, the Russians, the Chinese, everyone who mattered. It was theater, a performance of respectability that they all agreed to maintain. Hyunjin had been invited every year for the past decade and always attended alone, a statement of independence and power. Bringing someone, especially someone like Jean, would signal that he'd found something worth more than solitude. It would make her a target. It would expose her to a world that destroyed innocence as casually as he ordered cappuccinos. It would also be the most honest thing he'd done in 20 years. The next day, he had Park Min-soo deliver an invitation to Jean, along with a note in his handwriting. "Accompany me to the Met Gala on Saturday. No pressure. No obligations. Just a chance for both of us to exist in a different world for one evening." She called him that night, her voice careful. "Mr. Lee, I appreciate the invitation, but I don't think." "Say no if you want," he interrupted. "But not because you think you're not good enough or you don't belong or any other reason based on fear. If you say no, say it because you genuinely don't want to go." Silence stretched between them. Then quietly, "I don't have anything to wear to something like that. I'll handle it. Is that a yes?" Another pause. "Why me, Mr. Lee?" "Because everyone else at that gala will be performing. Pretending. Playing roles. You're the only genuine person I know, Jean. For one night, I want to stop pretending too." "Okay," she whispered. "Yes." He immediately contacted his luxury fashion consultant and arranged for a private fitting. When he told Park Min-soo, his reaction was predictable alarm. "Hyung-nim, bringing a civilian to the commission gala is dangerous. Bringing your maid is strategic," Hyunjin finished. "Everyone expects me to show up with some socialite or model, someone decorative and empty. Jean will surprise them, disarm them, give me an advantage, or paint a target on her back." Then I'll ensure nothing reaches that target. Increase security. Put our best team on her protection detail. Min-soo studied him with the frankness of a 20-year friendship. You're falling for her. I'm interested in her. There's a difference. Not in your eyes, there isn't. I've never seen you look at anyone the way you watch her. It's a liability, Hyung-nim. Feelings are. I know what feelings are, Min-soo. I also know what loneliness is. For 20 years, I've chosen power over everything else. Maybe it's time to choose differently. And if that choice gets her killed? The question haunted Hyunjin for the next 6 days. He increased security around Jean and her daughter anyway. He had his intelligence team investigate every possible threat vector. He personally reviewed the Gala's security protocols and placed his own soldiers in strategic positions throughout the venue. He did everything he could to protect her while knowing that in his world, safety was always an illusion. Saturday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Hyunjin was in the back of his armored Mercedes, heading to collect Jean from her apartment in Queens, when his phone rang. Castellano. Lee, I'm hearing interesting rumors about your +1 tonight. I wasn't aware my personal life required commission approval, Tony. It doesn't. But bringing a civilian, a nobody, to our event. Some of the families are wondering if you're losing your edge. Getting soft. Let them wonder. Their curiosity will keep them off balance. Or it'll make them think you've found a weakness they can exploit. His voice carried genuine concern beneath the warning. Despite their differences, Castellano respected protocol and understood that unnecessary wars were bad for everyone's bottom line. I'm not the problem, Lee. But Dimitri's been talking shit, saying you're pussy-whipped by some cleaning lady, saying maybe it's time for new leadership in the Korean territories. Dmitry Volkov. Russian mob, ambitious, violent, and stupid enough to mistake Hyunjin's strategic patience for weakness. Dmitry talks a lot for a man who moves half the product and makes a quarter of the profit. His opinion is irrelevant. Just watch your back tonight. Bring extra security. If Dmitry makes a move at the gala, it could get messy. Appreciated, Tony. Hyunjin hung up and immediately called Kim Jae-sung. Dimitri's planning something for tonight. Triple the security detail. Full tactical team on standby. If he so much as looks at Jean wrong, I want options to disappear him before dessert is served. Already on it, Hyung-nim. We intercepted chatter about a possible play during the gala. We'll be ready. The car pulled up to Jean's building, a modest walk-up in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. Hyunjin had wanted to send a car for her, but she'd insisted on him picking her up personally. If we're doing this, we're doing it right, she'd said. And right means you meet my mother and my daughter before we go anywhere. So he found himself climbing 3 flights of stairs, his $5,000 shoes echoing on worn linoleum, to knock on apartment 3C. Jean's mother, Helen, opened the door. She was in her 60s, with the same intelligent eyes as her daughter and a direct manner that immediately commanded respect. Mr. Lee. Come in. We've been expecting you. The apartment was small but immaculate, filled with photographs and the smell of something delicious baking. A little girl, Nia, peeked around her grandmother's legs, all big eyes and natural curiosity. Mommy says you're a prince, she announced. Hyunjin crouched down to her level, something he'd never done for anyone. Your mommy is very kind, but I'm just a businessman who's very happy to take her to a fancy party. She looks like a princess. Grandma and I helped her get ready. You better be nice to her. I promise to be the nicest I know how to be. Okay then. She nodded seriously, then ran back into the apartment. Helen studied him with the kind of assessment that only mothers possess. My daughter doesn't talk about her work much, Mr. Lee. But she came home 6 weeks ago without the fear she'd been carrying for 2 years. She stopped checking over her shoulder. Stop jumping at every phone call. I don't know exactly what you did, but I know my child is safe now. For that, you have my gratitude. Jean is special. Taking care of her isn't a burden, Mrs. Yancey. It's a privilege. You hurt her, and I don't care how much power you have. I'll find a way to make you regret it. If I hurt her, I'll deserve whatever you can devise. She smiled then, apparently satisfied. Jean, your young man is here. And then Jean emerged from the bedroom, and Hyunjin's entire world tilted on its axis. The dress was custom Valentino, midnight blue silk that flowed like water and somehow made her brown skin seem to glow from within. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased her graceful neck and the subtle diamond earrings he'd included with the dress. But it wasn't the clothes or the jewelry that stopped his heart. It was the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence, the dignified beauty that no amount of money could manufacture. She was absolutely breathtaking. "You're staring, Mr. Lee," she said softly, a small smile playing at her lips. "Hyunjin," he corrected, his voice rough. "Tonight, just Hyunjin." "Then you should probably stop looking at me like that, Hyunjin, or we'll never make it to this gala." Helen laughed. Nia giggled. Hyunjin tried to remember how to breathe. The drive to the Metropolitan Museum was quiet, charged with anticipation and something deeper. "You know this is going to cause talk," Jean said as they crossed the Queensboro Bridge, Manhattan's lights glittering like promises ahead of them. "I'm counting on it." "Why?" "Because I'm tired of pretending, Jean. I've spent 20 years building walls, maintaining distance, being the ghost. Tonight I want to be human. With you. And I want everyone to see that I choose you, publicly, knowing exactly what it means." "What does it mean?" "It means you matter to me. It means I'm willing to risk their judgment, their schemes, their violence, for the chance to have something real in my life. It means—" He took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. "It means I'm choosing life over survival. You taught me there was a difference." She laced her fingers through his, and they rode the rest of the way in silence, holding on to each other as the world they were about to enter loomed closer. The Met Gala entrance was chaos controlled by clipboard-wielding coordinators and enough security to protect a head of state. Photographers lined the red carpet, flashbulbs creating artificial daylight. Town cars and limousines disgorged New York's elite in designer everything, each arrival choreographed for maximum impact. When their car pulled up, Park Min-soo and Kim Jae-sung flanked the entrance, their earpieces barely visible, their eyes scanning for threats. 6 more of Hyunjin's soldiers were positioned throughout the immediate area, dressed as valets and security personnel. He'd taken no chances. "Ready?" he asked Jean. "To walk into a room full of people who will judge every breath I take?" "Not even a little bit." She squeezed his hand. "But I'm doing it anyway." "That's courage. Or insanity. The line's pretty thin." He helped her out of the car, and the moment her foot touched the red carpet, the cameras went insane. Photographers shouted his name, surprised by his companion, hungry for the story this represented. He ignored them all, keeping his hand on the small of Jean's back, guiding her forward with the possessive certainty of a man who'd found something worth claiming. They'd barely made it 10 feet when the whispers started. "Who is she?" "That's not his usual type. Did you see the way he looks at her? I heard she's his maid." "No fucking way." "Yes way," Castellano's people confirmed it. "This is going to be entertaining." Jean heard them too. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted, and she transformed before their eyes into something regal and untouchable. Whatever nerves she felt, she buried them beneath a dignity that made every woman in designer gowns look cheap by comparison. They entered the museum's great hall, where cocktails were being served beneath soaring arches and priceless art. The commission members were already there, clustered in their respective groups, conducting business under the guise of culture appreciation. Castellano was near the Temple of Dender, in conversation with the Lucchese representative. The Russian contingent, including Dmitri, held court near the American wing. The Chinese syndicate leader, Zhang Wei, observed everything from a strategic position that allowed him to monitor all entrances. And they were all staring at Hyunjin and Jean. "Smile," Hyunjin murmured to her. "You're about to be introduced to the most dangerous men in New York, and I need them to see that you're not intimidated." "I'm terrified." "I know. Smile anyway." She did, and it was luminous. He guided her first to Castellano, a show of respect that wouldn't go unnoticed. "Tony, may I introduce Jean Yancey?" "Jean, this is Anthony Castellano, one of New York's most respected businessmen." Castellano took her hand with surprising gentleness. "Miss Yancey, any woman who can make Lee look human deserves my utmost respect. Welcome." "Thank you, Mr. Castellano. Your reputation precedes you." "I hope not too accurately." He smiled, genuinely charmed. "Lee, she's extraordinary. Don't fuck this up." "Noted." They made the rounds. The Lucchese representative, Marco Santoro, kissed Jean's hand and declared Lee a lucky bastard. Zhang Wei engaged her in conversation about art history and seemed genuinely impressed by her knowledge, gained from community college classes and museum visits on her days off. Even the normally taciturn Irish representative, Seamus O'Malley, cracked a smile at something she said. And then they reached Dmitry Volkov. He was flanked by his lieutenants, Victor and Alexei, both known for enjoying violence more than was professionally acceptable. Dmitry himself was in his 40s, handsome in a brutal way, with eyes that held all the warmth of a Siberian winter. He looked Jean up and down with deliberate disrespect before addressing Hyunjin in Russian, knowing she wouldn't understand. "So the rumors are true. The ghost has fallen for his cleaning woman. How delightfully democratic of you, Lee." Hyunjin responded in Korean, equally aware Dmitry wouldn't follow. "Jealousy looks pathetic on you, Dmitry. Did your wife refuse to attend with you again, or did your mistress finally get smart and leave?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps we should speak in English, so your lovely companion can join our conversation." He switched languages smoothly, his accent thick but clear. "Miss Yancey, you must tell me how you managed to capture Lee's attention. I'm sure it's a fascinating story." "Not particularly," Jean replied calmly. "I cleaned his home. Talk. We became friends. Sometimes the simplest stories are the truest ones, Mr. Volkov." "How quaint. And now you're here, playing Cinderella at the ball. Tell me, does the clock strike midnight and turn you back into a servant, or have you permanently upgraded your station?" The insult was clear. Hyunjin's hand moved to his waistband instinctively, but Jean stepped forward slightly, her voice cool and steady. "Mr. Volkov, I've worked hard my entire life. I've cleaned houses, waited tables, raised a daughter, and put myself through school. I'm not ashamed of any of it. If you think my profession defines my worth, that says far more about your values than mine. Now if you'll excuse us, I believe they're seating for dinner." She turned with perfect grace, and Hyunjin followed, leaving Dmitry staring after them with an expression that mixed rage and grudging respect. "You just made an enemy," Hyunjin murmured as they walked toward the dining hall. "I already had one. At least now he knows I'm not easy prey." God, he wanted to kiss her right there in front of everyone. Dinner was a 7-course affair in the museum's Petrie Court, beneath the soaring glass ceiling that revealed stars beyond. Hyunjin was seated at the main table with the commission heads, and Jean was beside him, the only non-family member at the inner circle. It was a statement, a declaration, and everyone knew it. Between the third and fourth courses, Castellano stood to give the traditional toast, thanking everyone for their charitable contributions and continued cooperation in making New York prosperous. It was code for "thank you for maintaining territorial peace and continuing to make us all rich," and everyone raised their glasses appropriately. Then Dmitri stood, unscheduled. "I'd like to propose an additional toast," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. "To Lee Hyun-jin, who reminds us that in America, anyone can rise above their station. And to his lovely companion, who proves that even in our world, Cinderella stories can come true. May their fairy tale have a very happy ending." The words were congratulatory. The tone was mocking. The implication was threatening. He was suggesting Jean was a social climber, that their relationship was transactional, that her presence here was theater rather than genuine connection. He was undermining Hyun-jin in front of the entire commission, and he was doing it with a smile. Jean stiffened beside Hyun-jin. The eyes of every mob boss in New York waited to see how he'd respond. The weight of reputation and power and respect balanced on this single moment. Hyun-jin stood slowly, his champagne glass steady in his hand. "Dmitri, your toast reveals an interesting perspective. You see Cinderella as someone who needed a prince to validate her worth. I see a woman who survived abuse, maintained her dignity, and was simply recognized for the treasure she always was. The prince didn't make Cinderella valuable. He was just smart enough to see what was already there." He turned to Jean, meeting her eyes. "To the woman who taught me that power without humanity is just expensive loneliness. And to the courage it takes to be genuine in a world of pretenders." The table erupted in applause. Even Castellano looked impressed. Zhang Wei nodded with approval. Dimitri's face went red, but he sat down, outmaneuvered. Jean's hand found Hyun-jin's under the table, squeezing gently. "That was either very brave or very stupid," she whispered. "With you, I'm finding those are often the same thing." The dinner continued, tension simmering beneath polite conversation. Hyun-jin saw Dmitri in heated discussion with his lieutenants, saw them glancing toward Jean with speculation that made his trigger finger itch, saw the moment Dmitri excused himself from the table, Victor following. He leaned toward Park Min-soo, who was stationed against the wall behind him. "Dmitri just left with Victor. Track them. If they move toward Jean or make any calls to external parties, I want to know immediately." "Already on it, Hyung-nim." The fifth course arrived, some deconstructed interpretation of beef Wellington that probably cost more than Jean's monthly rent. She pushed it around her plate, her earlier confidence wavering under the sustained attention. "Everyone's still staring," she murmured. "Let them. You're the most beautiful woman here, and you're with me. They're trying to figure out what that means for the power dynamics. Let them wonder. Hyun-jin, what if Dmitri? He won't. He's a bully and a coward. He'll posture and threaten, but he won't make a direct move. Not here. Not with the entire commission watching." Hyun-jin believed that when he said it, he was wrong. The mistake happened during the 8th floor gallery viewing, when guests were invited to tour the museum's special exhibition on Korean art, a choice the organizers had likely made specifically because of Hyun-jin's attendance and generous annual donations. Jean was genuinely excited, her art history knowledge making her eyes light up as she examined Celadon pottery and Joseon dynasty paintings. "This is incredible," she breathed, studying a landscape scroll. "The technique, the patience this required. It's like meditation made visible." Hyun-jin was about to respond when his phone buzzed. A text from Kim Jae-sung. "Dmitri made 3 calls to unknown numbers. They just went dark. Could be nothing. Could be a play. Stay alert." He immediately scanned the gallery. Too many civilians. Too many corners. Too many variables. "We're leaving," he told Jean quietly. "But we just got here. Now, Jean. Trust me." She must have heard something in his voice because she didn't argue. He signaled Park Min-soo and Kim Jae-sung, and they began moving toward the exit, his hand on Jean's back, his awareness on high alert. They were 20 feet from the gallery entrance when the lights went out. Darkness, screaming, the sound of breaking glass. And then muzzle flash from 3 directions, bullets tearing through priceless art and million-dollar dresses. Someone was shooting, and in the chaos, Hyun-jin had lost Jean. Jean! He drew his weapon, a Glock 19 he'd carried despite the venue's weapon prohibition, because he was many things but stupid wasn't one of them. Jean, where are you? Here. I'm here. Her voice came from his left, and he moved toward it, using the flash from his phone to navigate. He found her crouched behind a display case, unharmed but terrified. Stay down, he commanded, shielding her with his body as more gunshots erupted. His security team was returning fire, their training evident in their controlled bursts. He heard Russian cursing, confirmation of who'd initiated this. Then the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red, and Hyun-jin saw Victor 15 feet away, his weapon trained on Jean. Dmitri sends his regards, he said in Russian. Hyun-jin put 2 rounds in his chest before he could finish the sentence. Victor went down hard, dead before he hit the marble floor. More shots, more screaming. Kim Jae-sung shouting orders in Korean. The distinctive sound of Castellano's people joining the fight, because attacking during a commission event was a violation so profound that even rival families would temporarily unite against the transgressor. And then silence, broken only by car alarms and sobbing. The lights came back on. 8 people were dead, including Victor and 2 other Russian soldiers. 12 more were wounded. Priceless Korean artifacts were destroyed. Blood pooled on floors that had hosted centuries of culture and civilization. Dmitri was gone, fled in the chaos like the coward he was. Hyun-jin helped Jean up, checking her frantically for injuries. Are you hurt? Did anything hit you? Talk to me, Jean. I'm okay. I'm okay. Her voice shook but held steady. What the hell just happened? Dmitri made his move. He tried to kill you to hurt me. He failed. People died, Hyun-jin. That man you shot was going to murder you in front of me. I don't regret his death, and I won't apologize for protecting you. Police sirens wailed in the distance. The commission members were already disappearing through prearranged exits, leaving cleanup crews to manage the scene and bribe the necessary officials. This was a mess that would require significant resources to contain, but it would be contained. It always was. Castellano appeared at Hyun-jin's elbow, his suit splattered with someone else's blood. Lee, get her out of here. My people will handle the police. You need to finish this with Dmitri before he goes to ground. Agreed. And Lee, that was good shooting. Clean. Professional. You protected yours. Respected. He nodded to Jean. Miss Yancey, I apologize for the excitement. This isn't how these events typically conclude. Mr. Castellano, in my experience, violence eventually finds everyone. I'm just grateful Hyun-jin was prepared for it. He actually laughed. Lee, you better marry this woman before someone smarter than you realizes what she's worth. They left through the service entrance, where Park Min-soo had a car waiting. As they pulled away from the museum, leaving behind the chaos and the corpses and the end of any pretense at civility with the Russian mob, Hyun-jin made a call. Find Dmitri Volkov. I don't care where he runs. I don't care who he calls. Find him and bring him to the Waldorf. I'll meet you there in 2 hours. That's how he ended up in the Waldorf Astoria penthouse suite with a gun in his hand and Dmitri Volkov bleeding on Italian marble, the scene described at the beginning of this story. He'd been found hiding in a Russian bathhouse in Brighton Beach, dragged out screaming about diplomatic immunity and commission neutrality, both of which became irrelevant the moment he'd opened fire at a commission event. You promised. He gasped as his life leaked away. I promised nothing, Hyun-jin corrected. You mistook civility for weakness, Dmitri. Fatal error. Dmitri died badly, which felt appropriate given what he'd tried to do. Hyunjin left his body for his cleanup crew and drove to Queens, to a modest walk-up where a woman and her daughter waited, unaware that he'd just committed murder to ensure their safety. Jean opened the door still in her Valentino gown, her mother and daughter asleep in the bedroom. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. "It's done. You're safe." "Did you kill him?" He could have lied, should have lied. But he'd promised her honesty, and he owed her that much. "Yes." She nodded slowly, processing this information. "Come inside." They sat in her small kitchen, drinking coffee from mismatched mugs while he still wore his blood-splattered Tom Ford suit. The contrast was almost funny. "I should be horrified," Jean said finally. "I should be calling the police, demanding you leave, protecting my daughter from a murderer. That's what a good person would do. But you killed a man who tried to kill me. You've protected me from my ex-husband, from Russian mobsters, from a world I barely understand. You've been nothing but honest and gentle and real with me, even when being real means admitting you've done terrible things." She set down her coffee cup. "So I'm not horrified, Hyunjin. I'm grateful. And that probably makes me a bad person. It makes you human. Morality isn't black and white, Jean. It's 1,000 shades of gray, and we all do the best we can with the choices we're given. What happens now? Now I go to war with what's left of the Russian operation. It'll be bloody and brutal and probably take months to resolve. I'll have enemies hunting me, contracts on my head, constant danger. And me. You have choices. I can arrange for you and Nia and your mother to relocate anywhere in the country. New identities, new lives, complete safety. Or you can stay under my protection and see where this thing between us goes. But understand that staying means accepting my world, my violence, my darkness. Means your daughter grows up knowing what I am. Means always looking over your shoulder. It means..." She kissed him. It wasn't gentle or uncertain. It was fierce and claiming and absolutely sure, her hands in his hair, her body pressed against his, tasting like coffee and courage and the best decision he'd ever made. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she said, "I'm staying. Not because you protected me, and not because I'm afraid to be alone. I'm staying because when I'm with you, I see a man trying to be better than his worst choices. I see someone who's lonely and powerful and so desperate for genuine connection that he invited his maid to a gala just to feel human for a few hours. I see someone worth taking a risk on. I can't promise you safety. I don't want safe, Hyunjin. I want real. I want this, whatever this is. This is me falling in love with you, Jean. Completely. Irrevocably. Dangerously. Good, she whispered. Because I've been falling for you since the day you ate my kimchi jjigae and looked like you'd found your way home. They stayed in that kitchen until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, planning a future that defied logic and probability. When Nia woke up, Hyunjin was still there, and Jean introduced him not as her employer but as someone very special to Mommy. The little girl studied him seriously, then announced, "You have nice eyes. You can stay for breakfast." And he did. He sat in that cramped kitchen eating scrambled eggs and toast while Helen watched with amused approval and Nia chattered about her kindergarten class, and he felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years. Peace. The war with the Russians lasted 7 months. It was brutal as predicted. Hyunjin lost 12 soldiers. They lost 43. Eventually, the remnants of their organization sued for peace, accepting a vastly reduced territory and steep tributes. He'd won, but the victory was expensive in blood and resources. Through it all, Jean stayed. She moved into his penthouse with Nia and Helen, transforming his sterile showpiece into an actual home. She quit her cleaning service and enrolled full-time in business school, funded by scholarships Hyunjin may have anonymously arranged. She learned the reality of his world, The late-night calls, the emergency departures, the days when he came home with blood on his clothes and death in his eyes. She never flinched. She simply drew him a bath, put Nia to bed, and held him until the darkness receded enough for him to sleep. Nia called him Uncle Gene, and had no idea that her uncle controlled half of New York's criminal underground. She just knew he helped with her homework, attended her school plays, and made her mother smile in ways her biological father never had. Helen became the grandmother Hyunjin had never known, teaching him her recipes, scolding him when he worked too late, reminding him that power without family was just expensive isolation. And Jean became his partner in every sense, the one person who saw all of him and chose to stay anyway. 2 years after the Met Gala disaster, Hyunjin proposed to her in that same Korean art gallery, now restored and reopened. He'd arranged a private viewing, just the two of them among the Celadon pottery and landscape scrolls she loved. "You once told me that power without humanity was just expensive loneliness," he said, kneeling before her with a ring he'd had custom made, a diamond set in a band engraved with Korean symbols for loyalty, love and home. "You taught me to be human again, Jean. You gave me a reason to want more than survival. You showed me that the strongest thing I could be wasn't untouchable, it was vulnerable. Will you marry me?" She cried, which he'd learned meant yes before she even said the word. Yes. Always yes. They married in a small ceremony in South Carolina, in the church where her grandmother used to sing. The guest list was unusual. Castellano and his wife, Zhang Wei and his daughter, reformed members of Hyunjin's organization who'd become something closer to family than soldiers, Jean's friends from school and her old neighborhood. 2 worlds colliding in a small Baptist church, unified by witnessing 2 people who had no business being together create something beautiful anyway. Park Min-soo was his best man. Helen cried through the entire ceremony. Nia was the flower girl and took her duties so seriously that she counted each petal she dropped to ensure even distribution. And when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Hyunjin kissed Jean like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning for decades. That was 3 years ago. Today, Hyunjin is still the ghost of Seoul in the files of every law enforcement agency on the East Coast. He still controls territories and moves illegal merchandise and makes decisions that would horrify civilians. But he's also a husband to an incredible woman who's now a successful business consultant, helping legitimate companies optimize their operations with the same skill she once used to clean his penthouse. He's a father to Nia, who's now 10 and wants to be a lawyer, specifically to help people like her mom who get trapped in bad situations. He's a son to Helen, who makes sure he eats properly and rests occasionally. And he's learning slowly that power isn't about being untouchable. It's about choosing what you're willing to be touched by. The life lesson here isn't simple or clean or appropriate for motivational posters. It's this: people are all more than their worst decisions, and everyone is worthy of redemption if they're brave enough to choose it. Jean saw past the monster to the man, not because she was naive but because she was wise enough to understand that people are complicated, that trauma creates armor, and that sometimes love isn't about finding someone perfect, it's about finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours. Hyunjin still does terrible things. He still operates in moral gray zones that would make philosophers weep. But he does them to protect a family he never thought he'd have, to maintain a peace that allows people like Jean to build legitimate businesses, to create space in this violent world for genuine love to exist. Is that redemption? The answer isn't clear. Ask again in another 20 years, when Nia's graduated law school and Jean and Hyunjin are old and gray, still surprising each other after decades of marriage. Ask when the violence has finally caught up with him, and he's facing whatever judgment awaits men like him. Ask then if it was worth it. But the answer is already known. Every single day with Jean is worth whatever price he'll eventually pay. Every smile from Nia is redemption he doesn't deserve but receives anyway. Every dinner with Helen is proof that family isn't about blood. It's about choosing each other repeatedly, even when it's hard. The ghost of Soul learned to be human again. And it was the scariest, most dangerous, most worthwhile thing he's ever done. So what did you think? Did Hyunjin make the right choice? Or was he selfish to bring Jin into his world? Could you see yourself making the same decisions Jin made? Choosing love despite the danger? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We genuinely want to know what you think about these characters and their impossible love story. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we're bringing you another story you absolutely cannot miss. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments too. We've got viewers from over 100 countries and we love hearing from every single one of you. You're not just an audience, you're our global family. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let yourself be vulnerable enough to love and be loved in return.